Hey everyone, Pastor Patrick Walker. We are in Genesis chapter 41. I just pulled a book off my shelf that is called The 14 Tests That All Leaders Must Face. It's a very small book. I'm going to open this up here and I need some self-medication today in this season of life. I love the story of Joseph because we can learn so much from him. And as a leader, Joseph had to face, this book is 14 tests that all leaders must face. I think he faced probably at least 10 of those 14. So I want to crack that book in a moment. Maybe I've read it so many times, I've got some things underlined, and whatever catches my eye, I'll share a couple of those things. But we are in Genesis chapter 41. Let's go through the scriptures first, and then I'll share a principle or two. So we've seen that Joseph is in prison. He's interpreted the dreams for the cupbearer and the baker. They have come true. However, the cupbearer, once being restored to that position, has forgotten all about Joseph, and he is in prison for another 2 years until Pharaoh has two dreams of his own. And that's where we pick up in Genesis chapter 41. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream and was standing on the Nile. Now, here's what he sees. I'll spare you the exact wordage. 2 fat cows come out of the Nile, followed by 2 slender, gaunt cows. Then he has a sec. He goes back to sleep. He's troubled in his mind. He goes back to sleep, and he sees basically 7 plump heads of grain and then 7 thin heads of grain, and he wakes up. Verse 8, in the morning, his mind was troubled. He sends for his magicians and wise men in Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Now, there's no mention as to why not. Why couldn't they just make it up? That's what I would do. If I'm getting paid and that's such a prestigious position, you got 7 good, 7 bad, 7 good, 7 bad, cows, grain. It seems, I feel like they could have guessed it, okay? This doesn't seem that difficult. So I have no idea. If he told them, it wasn't like Nebuchadnezzar with Daniel, where he and his magicians, he's like, I'm not telling you the dream. You got to tell me. Then I'll know that you're telling me the truth if you can tell me what I dreamed. And they're like, crap, we're screwed because there's no one under heaven that can do what the king is asking. But here he tells them the dream, but I have no idea why they can't offer him an interpretation that seems reasonable. Anyway. The chief cupbearer is there in the presence of the Pharaoh. He's like, man, I remember. I've got to run basically to the prison and pull this guy out who 2 years ago interpreted 2 dreams, very accurately. So he tells him about Joseph. Pharaoh makes the call. Joseph is shaved. He changes his clothes and he comes before Pharaoh. He's brought out of the dungeon. I don't know what that Hebrew word in verse 14 is, but in the NIV it says dungeon. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Now, I love his confidence, but also his willingness to deflect all glory to God here. He says, I cannot do it. All right. Now, that's... That wasn't his confident statement, okay? Well, that was confident. I cannot do it, right? He's confident about that. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. That's the confidence. Maybe 2 aspects. I can't do it, but God will do it. Not can do it, God will do it. That's faith. That's confidence. So he recognizes his own limitations and he gives God the credit for what's about to occur. And that's where we're going to stop there at verse 16. So just thinking about the life of Joseph, as we summarize the 13 years that he spent as a slave and that he spent in prison unjustly. So just the introduction of this book, 14 Tests All Leaders Must Face, talks about how all of us will face trials and tests in our life. And those are specifically, he's talking about God's children, specifically chosen by God to come your way for special purposes, okay? And that trials are a means, an instrument that God uses to reveal the heart, the motivations, the character of an individual. So they're strategically designed to reveal the worth, the value, the maybe the internal structure of an individual. As I said, motivations, character, the heart, basically to discern the quality of the object that's being tested. Will that person break under pressure? Will they throw in the towel and get discouraged? Now, just saying those two things, I've done those. So I feel discouraged. I just like, I don't even feel like I can pass his tests apart from his grace. Okay. But that's what he's doing. And you know what? You pass one test, then you go to the next level. Then you go to the next level. It's like you pass a test with one child, you go to 2 children, 3 children, 4 children. Now we're up to 8 children. Life is incredibly complicated. So we're at the phase where it's just like you pass one test, you go from 4th grade to 5th grade, and you have to learn all the character lessons all over again. So these tests are assigned to us. And I think they involve a level of suffering. I mean, stress. These are tests of faith, tests of character, tests of adversity, tests of crisis. And they originate in the mind and will of God to expose our weaknesses and deliver us from the things that are impure in our character and in our heart, things that would potentially destroy us. So here's some of the tests. Let me see if I can turn to the table of contents, and hopefully I can remember. Okay, so you got the time test. I mean, Joseph has to pass this one. He's given 2 prophetic dreams about his future, but he essentially has to wait over 20 years because once he's raised up to Pharaoh at the age of 30, it's not until 39 that he meets his siblings and they bow down before him. So he goes from 17 to 39. That's 22 years. The time test of waiting patiently upon the Lord. So patience test, time test, the word test where God gives you a word, but your circumstances don't seem to align with the fulfillment of that word. What do? There's a disconnect between what the word of God has said or what God has said to you and your current circumstances. Then you've got the character test. Like, why would God raise up Joseph if he can't learn to be a servant leader in the prison? Why would he raise him up to be a servant leader of a nation? So you've got the character test, the motivation test. That's another one. Motivation. Why are you doing what you're doing? You know, he had to have pure motivations before he was raised up. Otherwise, he would have abused his power. So he had to work through bitterness, work through that feeling of revenge, work through the pain, the trauma of being betrayed by his own family. The wilderness test, Moses went through the wilderness test, where it's just dry, like ministry. I mean, I guess you could say the prison too. It's like, I have nothing. I've lost everything in my life. I've got nothing. Same thing for Moses. You're in the wilderness and it's as if you have no future. Frustration test, discouragement test. That's another one. The warfare test, self-will, vision, usage. Sometimes God just puts you on the shelf and just refuses to use you. So you maybe be a highly skilled individual that God has placed on the shelf for an undisclosed period of time as he tests you with your prioritization of time and energy, your heart, your willingness to joyfully continue and pursue him as the primary purpose of your life rather than pursuing success or prosperity or ministry, etc. So we have all of these tests, and as I read through and meditate on the life of Joseph, I am encouraged because I become aware in the text that God is intimately aware of what's going on with Joseph. Though he may appear to be absent, he is aware. He is present. He is involved in the details, and he has a perfect timing for all things. So if any of us are struggling with, God, when is this going to happen? When am I going to see an answered prayer? When are we going to see breakthrough? I'm feeling discouraged. My circumstances appear to be a wilderness, appear to be a prison. I'm being attacked by enemies. When am I going to see God show up? When is there going to be a reversal of my situation? Only God can answer that question, but our focus should not be on securing our release from prison as Joseph was in the last devotional. Our focus has got to be on passing the tests through the trials, tribulations, suffering, and affliction that come our way, passing the tests so that in God's eyes, when he looks down, he sees us, he says, well done. And he can elevate us. He can bring us out because we've learned the lesson that he wants to teach us. And if we're unable to learn that lesson, and I am very stubborn, stubborn sometimes of my own, doing, but sometimes I'm just a slow learner. You know what you should do, but you just can't do it. And that can go on for years. It could take years to learn one simple lesson. So you're stuck in one phase of life for years. Now, again, I don't know Joseph's situation, but I do know that from the age of 17 to 30, that's 13, 12 years, he's in this difficult environment. But that was the time that God needed to forge in him the type of man, the type of godly man with the godly character and integrity that he needed to raise up, to position him as a powerful leader over Egypt under Pharaoh for the good of his family as they come to Egypt, and they are under his authority, I think probably for 60 plus years. So with that said, we'll stop here in chapter 41, verse 16, and I'll pick up next time with the interpretation of the dreams and the result of that interpretation. All right? Till next time, God bless.